If you'd have told me that Poppy would be preaching salvation instead of moving weight through the port of Houston, man, I'd have said you were smoking that bad stuff. Those are the words of Marcus Rodriguez Washington, whose father once controlled a pipeline that stretched from the dusty border towns of Laredo all the way to the concrete jungle of Chicago's South Side. But this story begins in Houston's Fifth Ward, a neighborhood where the humidity sticks to your skin like guilt, and where survival means playing by rules the suburbs will never understand. The late 90s were a different beast in H-Town. While Microsoft was changing the world and everyone was worried about Y2K, the streets had their own economy. Beepers chirped constantly. Cadillacs with swangers rolled down Scott Street, and money moved faster than traffic on I-45 during rush hour. Miguel Big Mike Rodriguez Washington wasn't just another player in the game. He was the house that always won. Born to a black mother from Louisiana's Bayou country and a Mexican father who crossed the Rio Grande with nothing but hope, Miguel understood both worlds. He spoke Spanish to the suppliers from Nuevo Laredo and switched to that Fifth Ward slang when dealing with the local crews. His mixed heritage wasn't a weakness, it was his superpower in a business where trust was currency and understanding culture meant the difference between a handshake and a body bag. The operation was surgical. 18-wheelers would roll through the port of Houston, America's second-largest port, carrying everything from oil equipment to electronics. But hidden in false compartments were packages that would make their way to Detroit's Corktown, Atlanta's Zone 6, and New York's Washington Heights. Miguel had crews in every major city, each one loyal not just because of fear, but because he understood family. In the Hispanic community, family is everything. In the black community, loyalty runs deeper than blood. Miguel spoke both languages fluently. But success in the streets comes with a price that compounds daily. The money was intoxicating, enough to buy his mama a house in Missouri City, far from the projects where roaches outnumber opportunities. Enough to send his kids to private schools in River Oaks while he continued to live dangerously. The contradiction ate at him, but addiction to power is harder to break than any substance he ever moved. The higher you climb, the thinner the air gets, and the longer the fall. By 1999, Miguel controlled territory from Houston's north side to the Louisiana border. DEA agents had photos of him eating breakfast at This It Soul Food, conducting business at Minute Maid Park during Astros games, and meeting contacts at the Galleria. He was hiding in plain sight, but the walls were closing in. Federal agencies don't just investigate, they orchestrate symphonies of surveillance that would make Beethoven jealous. The night everything collapsed started like any other. Miguel was at his favorite spot, a corner table at Papa Dos on Westheimer, celebrating his daughter's quinceañera with crawfish etouffee and dreams of legitimacy. He'd been talking about going clean, maybe investing in real estate or opening a chain of taquerias. The American dream was so close he could taste it, sweeter than Tres Leches cake. But dreams in the game are just nightmares waiting to wake you up. At 3:47 a.m., federal agents kicked down doors across 3 states simultaneously. The RICO charges read like a novel: conspiracy, money laundering, distribution, racketeering. 23 indictments, 17 arrests, millions in assets frozen. And Miguel, the man who had built an empire on trust and family values, found himself in Harris County Jail, staring at a ceiling that looked like the bottom of his grave. The irony wasn't lost on him. Houston, the city that had made him rich, was now the place where his freedom died. The same port that had been his gateway to wealth became evidence in his federal case. The streets that had respected his name were already forgetting it, preparing for the next king to rise from the concrete. In that holding cell, with the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry wasps and the smell of disinfectant mixing with defeat, Miguel faced a truth that no amount of money could change. He had built his throne on quicksand. Every decision that had brought him power had also dug his grave deeper. The game he thought he was winning had been rigged against him from the start. But sometimes hitting rock bottom is just the foundation for building something real. Sometimes the end of one story is just the prologue to a better one. As Miguel sat in that cell, listening to Houston's traffic humming in the distance, a city continuing without him, he didn't know that his greatest transformation was about to begin. The United States Penitentiary at Beaumont isn't just a prison. It's a concrete tomb for dreams, sitting 90 minutes east of Houston like a monument to broken lives. When Miguel arrived in shackles, the Texas heat hit differently. This wasn't a humid embrace of his hometown. This was the suffocating weight of consequences. Federal prison strips you down to nothing, then rebuilds you in ways you never expected. The first year was war against other inmates who saw his mixed heritage as weakness, against guards who treated him like just another number, and most brutally, against himself. Miguel had spent decades being Big Mike, the man whose word moved mountains of product and whose reputation could end careers. Now he was just inmate number 47893-177, eating mystery meat and counting days like rosary beads. The race politics inside were more complex than anything on the streets. The Hispanic inmates expected loyalty because of his father's blood. The black inmates claimed him because of his mother's heritage and his Fifth Ward roots. But Miguel belonged to neither group completely, and in prison, half measures get you killed. He fought more in the first 6 months of incarceration than he had in his entire criminal career, earning respect the hard way with split knuckles and blackened eyes. Solitary confinement became his second home. 23 hours a day in a cell smaller than most people's bathrooms, with 1 hour for exercise in a concrete cage that zoo animals look free. The silence was deafening. No Houston traffic, no Spanish radio stations, no laughter from his children. Just the echo of his own breathing and the slow drip torture of time. It was during his third stint in solitary, punishment for a fight that started over a disrespectful comment about his mama, that Miguel found the book that would change everything. Tucked behind the toilet, wrapped in plastic like contraband, was a water-damaged Bible. Some previous occupant had left it there, maybe as a gift to whoever came next, maybe as a joke. Miguel almost threw it away. But boredom is a powerful motivator, and after reading the same graffiti on the walls for the 100th time, he cracked it open. The pages stuck together from humidity and age, and the cover was held on by duct tape. This wasn't the leather-bound, gold-leafed Bible from his childhood church visits. This was a street Bible, worn down by desperate hands and tear-stained by broken hearts. The first passage that hit him wasn't about peace or love. It was about Moses, a murderer who became a deliverer. Here was a man who had killed an Egyptian overseer, fled to the desert, and spent 40 years thinking his life was over.
But God had different plans. Miguel read it once, then again, then 20 more times. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Sometimes your worst moment is just preparation for your greatest purpose. Night after night, under the harsh fluorescent light that never turned off completely, Miguel devoured those pages. He read about David, who went from shepherd to king, despite being the least likely candidate. He studied Paul, who persecuted Christians before becoming Christianity's greatest evangelist. Pattern after pattern, a broken man being used for divine purposes. But it wasn't just the stories, it was the promises. Jeremiah 29:11 became his anchor. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord.
February 14th, 2019, Valentine's Day. After 17 years, 2 months, and 11 days, Miguel Rodriguez Washington walked out of USP Beaumont into a world that had moved on without him. Smartphones had replaced beepers, social media had replaced street corners, and the Houston he had left behind was now a sprawling metropolis where tech companies shared skylines with oil refineries. At 53, Miguel was starting over with nothing but a federal ID, $200 in gate money, and a faith that had been forged in concrete and steel. The Greyhound ride from Beaumont to Houston gave him 2 hours to process freedom, 2 hours to prepare for a reality that no amount of prison preparation could simulate. Maria picked him up at the downtown station, and the reunion was everything and nothing like they had imagined. 17 years of letters had kept them connected, but connection isn't the same as presence. She was 45 now, with silver threading through her black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of struggles he couldn't share. He was grayer, smaller somehow, with prison pallor and the careful movements of a man who had learned to survive in confined spaces. Their children were adults now. Marcus, 32, was a social worker in Dallas, married with 2 kids Miguel had never held. Sophia, 29, taught music at an elementary school in Austin, her voice now trained and professional. Miguel Jr., 25, worked as a paralegal and was applying to law school, not to defend criminals like his father had been, but to help families navigate the system that had consumed theirs. The Houston they returned to together was different. The Fifth Ward was gentrifying, with coffee shops and art galleries replacing corner stores and vacant lots. The Port of Houston had expanded, moving more cargo than ever, but with security that would have made Miguel's old operation impossible. Even the suburbs had changed. Missouri City was now majority black and Hispanic, a testament to demographic shifts that had transformed the entire region. Miguel's parole officer met them at a halfway house in the 3rd Ward, not far from where he and Maria had started their life together 40 years earlier. The room was smaller than his prison cell, with a single window that looked out on a church parking lot. The irony wasn't lost on him. After 17 years of looking at concrete, his first view of freedom was a place of worship. Finding work with a federal conviction was like trying to build a house with no foundation. Applications were rejected before interviews. Jobs that hired ex-felons paid minimum wage for maximum humiliation. Miguel found work washing dishes at a soul food restaurant on Scott Street, scraping plates for $8 an hour while customers recognized him and whispered behind menus. But the humiliation was also preparation. Every rejected application was a lesson in humility. Every hour of washing dishes was a master class in service. Every whispered comment was practice in turning the other cheek. The man who had once commanded respect through fear was learning to earn it through grace. The call to ministry came, as many calls do, when Miguel least expected it. 3 months after his release, while mopping floors at the restaurant after closing time, he heard shouting from the street. A domestic dispute was escalating in the parking lot, a young father screaming at his girlfriend while their toddler cried in the back seat of a car. Old Miguel would have minded his own business or tried to intimidate the situation into silence. But 17 years of Bible study had rewired his instincts. He walked outside, not with authority, but with authenticity. "Brother," he called out, his voice cutting through the anger without escalating it. "I see you're hurting. I've been there, but your son is watching and he's scared." Something in Miguel's voice, perhaps the weight of experience, perhaps the authority that comes from having nothing left to lose, diffused the situation. The young man broke down crying, talking about unemployment, eviction notices, and the pressure of providing for a family when the world seemed designed to knock him down. Miguel listened, then shared his own story, not the glamorized version, but the raw truth about choices and consequences, about losing everything and finding something better in the process. By the time they finished talking, the young man was asking for Miguel's phone number, wanting to know more about this faith that could transform a cartel leader into a counselor. Word spread through the Third Ward's network of churches, community centers, and corner stores. The ex-kingpin who had found Jesus in federal prison was helping people for free, offering the kind of real talk that couldn't be found in traditional counseling offices. Pastors began calling, asking Miguel to share his testimony at Wednesday night services and youth programs. The breakthrough came when Pastor Williams at St. Matthew Baptist Church offered Miguel a position as a volunteer chaplain for their prison ministry. It was unpaid, but it was purpose. Every Saturday, Miguel returned to Harris County Jail, not as an inmate, but as hope in human form. He spoke to young men who reminded him of his former self, sharing the gospel in language they understood, using examples from streets they knew. His messages were different from traditional preaching. When Jesus talked about laying down your life for your friends, Miguel explained what that really meant to people who had lived by street codes. When Paul wrote about being all things to all people, Miguel showed them how authenticity was more powerful than performance. The vision for his own church came during a particularly powerful prayer session at the county jail. As Miguel watched hardened criminals weep and surrender their lives to Christ, he felt the unmistakable call to plant something new. Not a traditional church that would make people comfortable, but a place where broken people could find healing, where the streets met the sacred. With $700 in savings, borrowed folding chairs, and a rented storefront on Alameda Road, New Covenant Community Church held its first service on September 15, 2019. 23 people showed up, mostly family members and friends from the halfway house. Miguel preached for 20 minutes about second chances, using his federal conviction as his testimony and his transformation as his credentials. By Christmas, attendance had grown to 60. By the following summer, they had outgrown the storefront and moved to a renovated warehouse space that could hold 200.
The congregation was beautifully diverse. Former gang members sitting next to suburban families, grandmothers who had prayed for their grandchildren for decades, worshiping alongside young people who had never stepped foot in a church. Miguel's preaching style was unpolished, but undeniably authentic. He talked about grace like someone who had experienced it firsthand, about redemption like someone who had lived it, about hope like someone who had found it in the darkest possible place. His Mexican heritage brought warmth and family values. His Black Louisiana roots brought soul and authenticity. His Houston streets brought credibility and connection. The church became more than a Sunday gathering. It became a community center, offering job training, financial literacy, marriage counseling, and mentorship programs. Maria led the women's ministry, using her experience as a single mother to help other women navigate crisis. Marcus drove down from Dallas monthly to run legal clinics for people trapped in the system. Sophia organized music programs for children whose parents were incarcerated. 3 years after walking out of federal prison with nothing, Miguel stood before a packed sanctuary every Sunday morning, preaching hope to people who had forgotten what it looked like. The same voice that had once ordered murders now called people to life. The same hands that had counted drug money now lifted in worship. The same mind that had planned criminal enterprises now developed ministry strategies. But perhaps the most powerful transformation was in the next generation. Young men who might have followed in Miguel's footsteps instead found different paths through the church's